March 29, 1989. Inside a Tokyo police station, four young men sat nervously as detectives interrogated them for the kidnapping and gang rape of a 19-year-old girl. The suspects seemed remorseful. They admitted to having committed a horrific crime against a girl, but something felt off. The details they provided didn't match the evidence the police already had. Their confessions seemed genuine, yet they weren't aligning with the case under investigation. So, the detectives made a strategic decision. They separated the four boys and interrogated them individually. What happened next sent chills down the spine of everyone in that room. Despite being questioned alone, each of the suspects told the exact same story. That could only mean one thing. They were telling the truth. But shockingly, their confessions weren't about the case the police were investigating. These boys were admitting to an entirely different crime, one far worse than what the police had initially imagined. Detectives pressed them for more details. That's when the horrifying truth surfaced. The suspects revealed that they had kidnapped a girl, brutally tortured her, and ultimately killed her. In an attempt to hide the evidence, they had stuffed her body into a 55-gallon drum, filled it with concrete, and dumped it at a construction site in Wakasu, Tokyo. The police wasted no time. They rushed to the location, searching frantically. And then they saw it, a heavy steel drum sitting in an isolated part of the site. When they cracked it open, an unbearable stench filled the air. Inside was a decomposed human body. Forensic experts immediately took over, carefully extracting the remains. The body was unrecognizable, mutilated beyond belief. But the autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. The cause of death was traumatic shock, meaning the victim endured unimaginable suffering before finally succumbing to her injuries. Small needles were embedded inside her breasts, deliberately pierced into her flesh. Plastic bottles had been forcibly inserted inside her rectal cavity. The victim was pregnant at the time of her death. Her face was so severely damaged that identifying her seemed nearly impossible. But the forensic team didn't give up. After hours of meticulous work, they managed to extract her fingerprints, and what they found would uncover one of the most gruesome crimes in human history. This was the tragic case of Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old girl from Minato, Japan. She lived with her parents and younger brother and was a student at Yaeshio Minami High School. Unlike most teenagers, she was incredibly disciplined, balancing her studies with a part-time job at a plastic molding factory. She had one goal: to save enough money for her graduation trip. Junko was known for her kind personality, beauty, and intelligence. But sometimes being admired can attract the wrong kind of attention, and that's exactly what happened. A group of 4 school dropouts frequently loitered around her school, bullying students and flexing their connections with the Yakuza, Japan's notorious organized crime syndicate. These boys were Hiroshi Miyano, 18 years old, Joe Ogura, 17 years old, Shinji Minato, 16 years old, Yasushi Watanabe, 17 years old. Hiroshi Miyano, the group's leader, had a crush on Junko. But when he confessed his feelings, Junko politely rejected him. She had no idea that this rejection would seal her fate. November 25th, 1988. Junko had just finished her part-time shift and was cycling home. But 2 familiar figures were lurking nearby: Hiroshi Miyano and Shinji Minato. As soon as they spotted her, they devised a sinister plan. Hiroshi turned to Shinji and said, "Go knock over her bike. I'll pretend to help her." Without hesitation, Shinji kicked the bicycle, sending Junko crashing to the ground. Before she could react, Hiroshi rushed to her side, offering a friendly hand. Junko recognized him from school, so she let her guard down. Big mistake. Instead of taking her home, Hiroshi led her to an abandoned hotel in Adachi. Once there, he revealed his true nature. He grabbed her by the hair, pulled out his phone, and made a chilling threat. "If you try to escape or tell anyone, my gang will hunt down your family and kill them. Junko froze in fear. She had no choice but to obey. That night, Hiroshi Miyano did unthinkable things to Junko, but he wasn't done yet. Satisfied with his sick desires, he called his friends. One by one, Shinji Minato, Joe Ogura, and Yasushi Watanabe arrived at the scene. Each of them took turns violating Junko. The original plan was to release her afterward, but then it dawned on them. If she went to the police, they were finished. So, they made a decision. They would keep her captive, and that's when 44 days of hell began. The boys dragged Junko to Minato's house and forced her to call her parents, saying, "I've run away with a boy. I'm safe. Please don't look for me." Heartbroken, her parents withdrew the missing person report. Now, Junko was completely trapped. For the next 44 days, the 4 boys and over 100 different men subjected Junko to brutal abuse. They kept her naked at all times, forced her to perform degrading acts, repeatedly burned her with cigarettes and lighters, inserted glass bottles, hot bulbs, and even iron rods into her genitals, beat her with golf clubs, iron rods, and dumbbells, broke her legs, forcing her to crawl to the bathroom, starved her and made her drink urine. Junko begged them to kill her, but they refused. Her body became infected, oozing pus and blood. The boys grew disgusted with her deteriorating condition, yet they continued their abuse. Then, January 4th, 1989, came. Hiroshi Miyano lost all his money in gambling. Furious, he unleashed all his rage on Junko. He beat her mercilessly for hours. This time, she didn't survive. The next morning at 10 a.m., Junko Furuta took her last breath. To cover up the crime, they stuffed her body inside a 55-gallon drum, poured wet concrete inside, and dumped it at a construction site. But justice was shockingly lenient. Hiroshi Miyano, 20 years in prison. Joe Ogura, 10 years in prison. Shinji Minato, 9 years in prison. Yasushi Watanabe, 7 years in prison. Their punishments, far too light for the horrors they committed. And that is the tragic story of Junko Furuta, one of the most disturbing crimes in history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think justice was served?